Donald Trump's unprecedented deployment of National Guard troops to American city represents one of the most controversial expansion of presidential power in modern US history. Since returning to White House, Trump has systematically federalized state National Guard units and deployed them to multiple Democrat-led cities, sparking fierce constitutional battles and debates and also raising profound questions about the militarization of domestic law enforcement. Trump's latest push to deploy National Guard forces stems from his aggressive immigration crackdown and also his claims about rising crime in Democratic-controlled cities. Well, the president has authorized deployment of 300 National Guard troops to Chicago following immigration protests, particularly demonstrations outside detention center where federal agents clashed with protesters opposing mass deportation policies. Well, the Trump administration frames these deployments as necessary responses to what Trump calls out-of-control crime and the need to support immigration and customs enforcement operations. However, if you look at the data, and what data reveals is a more complex picture. Crime statistics shows particularly Chicago has experienced significantly less crime, with homicides down by 30% and shootings down by 40% in the past year, while Washington DC is experiencing a 30-year low crime rate. Trump's ability to deploy National Guard troops domestically relies on a relatively obscure provision of US military law, specifically 10 US Code 12406, which allows the president to summon National Guard troops from any states if the US faces invasion or threat of invasion by a foreign nation, or rebellion, or a risk of rebellion against the federal government. Well, Trump has invoked this statute to federalize thousands of National Guard troops, bypassing normal state-level approval processes that typically requires governor's consent for such deployment. Though the critics argue that Trump's deployment violates multiple fundamentals of the Constitution, with federal judges already ruling that his Los Angeles deployment in June violates the Posse Comitatus Act. Trump's National Guard strategy has expanded systematically across the country, beginning with Los Angeles in June 2025, where 700 Marines and 4,000 National Guard troops were deployed amid immigration protests. Well, the administration has now deployed forces to Washington DC, Memphis, and is now pushing deployment to Chicago and Portland. Now remember, approximately 2,000 National Guard troops were sent to Washington DC in August, with Trump claiming this brought total safety and a miracle reduction in crime, despite polls showing nearly 80% of DC residents opposed to Trump's deployment. Trump's deployment strategy appears deliberately targeted at Democratic-controlled cities, with the president using increasingly militaristic language to describe domestic conditions. He has called Portland war-ravaged and like living in hell, while describing Chicago as a mess and claiming residents are screaming for federal intervention. In fact, at a gathering of military brass, Trump called for using US cities as training ground for troops and warned of an invasion from within, rhetoric that critics describe as inflammatory and designed to discourage dissent. Democratic governors have responded with fierce resistance and legal challenges. Illinois governor has accused Trump of attempting to manufacture a crisis, while Oregon governor stated there is no insurrection in Portland, no threat to national security. Remember, California Governor Gavin Newsom has also filed multiple lawsuits challenging Trump's federalization of California National Guard troops. The escalating confrontation between Trump and state governments represent more than just a policy dispute. It constitutes to a fundamental test of constitutional limits of presidential power and the separation of military and civilian authority. As Trump continues to push the boundaries of federal authority while courts attempt to impose legal restraints, the ultimate resolution of these conflicts may reshape the balance of power between federal and state governments for generations to come. Well, the biggest question remains, whether America's constitutional safeguards can withstand this unprecedented challenge to principle that in a democracy, the military serves the constitution, not political ambitions.